within the first month after the birth. And after that, I met other children and other victims, and the trip was so heartbreaking for me, and I think especially because of the children, because now it's the fourth generation of victims. These are the kids that were born in 2018 or 2019 or a few years before, and the last test took place 30 years ago. And I think that's, for me, is the most heartbreaking part of the story, is that the tests are not happening anymore for decades now, but we're still seeing the impact of that.
What's that?
Speaking from Kazakhstan.
And so let me just give you a bit of a background of the Soviet nuclear testing program. The decision to, they started building the testing site in Kazakhstan in 1947. And they took a huge part of the land you can see on the slide, the Semipalatinsk testing ground. And the way they described, the Soviet military described their choice is just, it's so clinical almost. They say this is uninhabited land. There is access to building materials. There is nothing there in terms of nothing we have to worry about. And so they portrayed it as this perfect geographical space for conducting their tests. And I think what strikes me is that they always described it as desolate and uninhabited, some godforsaken Kazakh steppe. But if you're a Kazakh, like I am, then you have a different perception of the same land. Here you have a photo from my most recent trip in November of last year, and it's just so beautiful. This is the part that is steppe, but the region is actually very diverse, because in some parts you have pine trees, you have rivers, and it's extremely diverse and very rich in flora and fauna. For example, this is a very rare antelope called saiga, and it's a protected animal, and these animals disappeared during the tests, but they're coming back now. It's also a very special place in terms of history and culture. The nearby major city of Semipalatinsk was where the merchants from Russia, Europe, Central Asia would gather, starting from the 18th, 19th century, they would gather at the markets of Semipalatinsk and trade goods. And so it's a place that is extremely important from cultural, historical points of view. And it's the region that produced the most famous writers and poets, and even a singer who in 1920, I think he got the second place in Paris at some international singing competition. So for Kazakhs, this is a place that is extremely important for our identity as a nation. But it's on this land that the Soviet military conducted nuclear tests for 40 years, initially in the atmosphere until 1963, and then underground until 1989. And over the years, I've read so many eyewitness accounts, and I just wanted to read just one of them. This is from 1955, when the Soviet military conducted a thermonuclear test. And these are the words of a medical nurse from a village about 100 kilometers away from the epicenter. And this is how she described it. On the eve of the test, the military came to our village and gave instructions. In the morning, after breakfast, we walked all patients staying at the hospital outside. We put them face down to the ground and covered them with the bed linen. And I don't know, whenever I read accounts like that, I just feel so heartbroken. You can imagine if, you're already vulnerable, you're in the hospital, and I imagine there were a lot of old people, and then, or vulnerable people or sick people, and then you put them on the ground and you don't even have anything to protect them with, and you just cover them with bed linen. And I think it was very cruel that the Soviet military would always advise that people come outside during the tests, and they did it because obviously, the if for example, and it happened often that the walls would crack, and I think they were afraid that if people stayed inside the houses and if something fell, the injuries would be more noticeable. But obviously it was, in terms of radiation, it was worse that people were outside rather than inside. And so, very soon health issues started becoming very obvious in the area near the testing site. A lot of cancers, and the doctors were prohibited to give truthful diagnosis. A lot of issues with cancers, blood diseases, issues with pregnancies and stillbirths and deformed babies. And one of the most sinister side effects, I guess, of the 40 years of nuclear tests was that the rates of suicide had increased tremendously. And for some reason, mostly among young men, but there were also cases of young women. And I wanted to tell you a story. And so you have this context of complete secrecy when the Soviet military establishment is basically, very keen on not disclose the negative impact of the testing program. But on the ground, people are getting sick. And so at some point in 1957, a group of medical specialists from Kazakhstan, they worked for the Institute of Regional Pathology, and it was part of the Kazakh Academy of Sciences. They were able to get a permission to start a medical expedition to go to the region and start going around the villages and collecting clinical data. And it's incredible that it was possible. So the president of the Kazakh Academy of Sciences authorized it, and I think he had support from the health minister of the Soviet Union. I forgot her name, but there was a female minister who supported this endeavor, and they were able to do it for 3 years. They surveyed the people, and they filled in 12 volumes with their reports. And again, these are physicians, and it wasn't an emotional account. It wasn't a narrative. It was just, scientific record and written in medical jargon. But when you read those accounts, it just becomes so clear that something horrible was happening, and this abstract data spoke very loudly. And just some I wanted to give you just a snapshot of what I wrote down for myself from those reports, and not in their language, but a summary. Blood did not circulate properly in people's brains. Those who were exposed long-term to high amounts of radioactivity lost their sense of taste and smell. They suffered from the changes to their noses, ears, and throats. The neurological pathologies made people tired and caused headaches and dizziness. And many locals were even losing their swallowing reflex, the body's essential defense mechanism against choking on food. And so they were able to do it for 3 years. And then they were brought to Moscow for a classified conference with the medical experts affiliated with the Soviet military program. And I read the transcript from that conference, and basically it's all about that you were wrong and you're exaggerating and your people are getting sick because they don't eat enough vitamin C, and they live in unhygienic circumstances and so on. And these doctors from Kazakhstan, they would say, yes, like obviously people don't have enough vitamins, or their diet is poor and the social economic conditions are poor, but it doesn't mean that radiation is not contributing to making people even more sick. And then, of course, the military establishment, the Soviet government also, they had, because people were getting so sick, they had to observe, they wanted to study the impact of ionizing radiation on people. And so what they did, they set up a clinic, which they called the Anti-Brucellosis clinic, just to disguise what they were doing. It was established in this major city of Semipalatinsk in the late 50s, and they started doing their studies beginning the early 60s. And one of the main studies that they did, they observed 10,000 people who lived close to the nuclear testing site, and then 10,000 more from further away regions as a control group. But they observed them, they didn't treat them. That was not the point of that clinic. They only had 15 or 20 hospital beds. So obviously it wasn't about treating, it was about observing and getting information how ionizing radiation impacts people, and information that is useful for military planning. But then in the late 1980s, and Mary was the direct participant of these events, a combination of many factors. We had the new president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, who opened up more space for freedom, like controlled space, but that got a little bit out of control. And then people were also fed up in the republics. In Kazakhstan, it wasn't only about nuclear tests, but I think in general, the Soviet republics were entering this point of being so fed up with being governed by Moscow. And so against this context, this is when the Kazakh anti-nuclear movement called Nevada Semipalatinsk was born. And Kazakhs added Nevada because they wanted to show this affinity and connection to others, to other peace activists outside of Kazakhstan. And so many rallies and protests followed. In terms of chronology, this is 1989 when the movement was established. And so for a couple of years, you have rallies all over the country. And what's very endearing, people of Kazakhstan were not alone in the struggle. We had international peace activists coming and joining those protests and those marches. And I wanted to read you a memory from Dan Yan, who was at the time the president of Physicians for Social Responsibility. And he came to Kazakhstan and he describes, in Karaul is the village near the testing site. In Karaul, 2,000 or 3,000 people met us and mingled with us in a large field as dozens of their fellow villagers told the sad stories of Soviet downwinders. American downwinders and hibakusha from Japan told their stories as well. While the stories were tragic, the atmosphere was that of a great celebration. Kazakh musicians and dancers entertained us, Our hosts in Karaul gave us a glorious feast in yurts, some 40 of which had been erected for the occasion. The children, who had never seen foreigners before, circulated everywhere asking us to sign their papers. And Mary has a beautiful article also published, which she probably might share with you later. And she also has some very warm and wonderful recollections from those times. And so international peace activists, they also drew inspiration from the Kazakh movement, and which was in turn inspired by international peace activists. And the same person, Jan, described his emotions after his trip to Kazakhstan. We found ourselves inspired, maybe a little proud, to have stood by the side of these extraordinary people. And you can see that even for the logo of the Nevada Semipalatinsk anti-nuclear movement, they wanted to portray a Kazakh elder and a Shoshone tribe member. And on the right, you can see some archival photos from all those rallies and marches. And so, now I want to bring us back to today, and that anti-brucellosis clinic that was established during the Soviet times to study the impact but not treat the people. On that basis, on the basis of that institution, when the Soviet Union broke up and Kazakhstan became independent, the Kazakh government established a proper medical clinic called the Institute of Radiation Medicine and Ecology. And they tasked it with now both studying and treating the people. And I just wanted to give you some bits of data from the studies that they did. And they divide the population near the former testing site into 3 generations. Although now we already have the 4th. And you can see that the first generation, this group, they break it down. They use 1963 because the atmospheric nuclear test took place until 1963. So that's why there is a cutoff point there. And then the second generation, those born between 63 and 81. And then the third generation, those born after 1982. And so what they did, they took the data that they actually were able to see, because a lot of archival documents were removed, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Russians were withdrawing. A lot of medical records were taken away, especially from the military institutions. At this former anti-brucellosis clinic, they were able to save maybe about 20% of data. But in any case, what they did, they took those cases from the 60s of those 10,000 people, and they reassessed them again. And they also, looked at the control group data. And, they could see a very clear connection that people who lived near the polygon, they face significantly higher general and cancer-related mortality. And you can see on the slide some of the most common types of cancers. They also conducted some additional DNA studies that showed that, if the received dose was 250 millisievert or higher, then there was an increased chance for chromosome aberrations among already the second and the third generations of victims. But I want, to kind of concluding with my prepared remarks, I wanted to loop us back to where I began. If you remember, I mentioned the trip to the villages in 2019. And so after that first baby that we met with 6 fingers, we went to another family, and we met another family, and you can see the smallest girl on this photo, she's actually missing 4 fingers on one of her hands. And obviously I'm you know, not a doctor, not a physician, and the data is still very, I find that the data is very disrupted, and not, I don't think we in Kazakhstan have a full comprehensive view of what happened, and the full details, or fully scientifically rigorous study. But if you go to those villages, it's just very obvious that that there are too many people who are sick, including children. And it's very obvious that there are not too many elders, because people die early. And so with this family, the smallest is missing 4 fingers. The girl who stands next to her, her sister, she had a facial bone cancer. They also lost another daughter earlier, and this is just one family. And but at the same time, what I want to reiterate, I think it's very important for people who live near the former testing site not to be portrayed or seen only as victims, because they're very proud of where they come from. They're very proud of their land. And, you know, for example, this family is very symbolic to me. It's a functional, happy family. And the girls, you know, they're very active. They love to sing and dance and all of that. And we now keep in touch with them. And I actually went again now in November, again, to all these villages near the former testing site. And you see, we enjoyed so much seeing them. And it's very moving, you know, when you ask those people who live in those areas why you never left, or why you are not living now. And partly it's because they think that whatever damage has happened to their family is already something that they will carry no matter where they go. But more importantly, they respond in a way which is very understandable to me as a Kazakh. There is this huge affinity to the place where you were born, you know, the place where your ancestors were buried. It's very important for them to be, you know, to stay in that land. And so what I want to leave you with is that when I go to those places, the strongest emotion that I have is that I just wish the policymakers and the diplomats who discuss nuclear weapons policies and strategies meet these people and go to those places and just see that nuclear weapons programs are not something abstract. They do interfere with people's fates and destinies and lives. And now we have 30 years past the last Soviet nuclear test in Kazakhstan, and the legacy is clearly still continuing. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Kassenova, Oksana. This brings back memories of my time at that protest, and I should tell those of you who are older that Alex Bryans, pediatrician, was there, and Ed Crispin, who was a general practitioner from Ontario, and myself and one other person I can't remember. I remember Alex being asked as a pediatrician to see a 3-year-old child who had childhood leukemia. And at that time, that was 1990, the statistics in Canada had gone from a 5% survival rate to 95% survival rate with childhood leukemia. But in Kazakhstan, this child would not have access to any of that treatment. And Alex came back just completely devastated because there was nothing he could say of comfort to this family. And the other thing that I remember is being in the, you saw that beautiful table of food. We had an amazing feast after the protest, marching and talking. We were in the yurts with 20 people in a yurt and a host. And after we had spoken and all in different languages, trying to express our feelings about being there, the host turned to everyone and said, when I was growing up, I was told that we had to have this test range because the enemy was lurking just behind the hills and they would get us if we weren't prepared. And so we had to make this sacrifice for the Soviet Union. But he said, now I look around and I see that, and then he named each of the people. He said, Tim, you're not my enemy. And John, you're not my, and Mary, you're not my enemy. So who is then my enemy? And he said, we don't have enemies and you are all my family. And I just will always remember that. That's now 30 years ago, but it's very clear in my mind, the warmth of the people there of Kazakhstan. So I'm going to stop at Negrit. Can I leave you in charge of watching for people with their hands up so they can comment or ask questions at this point? There's Richard has his hand up. And the rest of us, if we could please stay muted so there's not interference with the sound, that'd be great.
I want to thank you very much, Doctor, for an excellent presentation. And also Mary Wynn, you brought back memories of my own time in Semipalatinsk when IPPNW had their Congress there. I guess it's about 6 years ago in Astana. And then we flew up to Semipalatinsk and had the same experience. We were in the yurts and dining on fermented yak milk and eating the goat meat and all the other things, lots of food. And again, we toured a museum which showed all of what you have told us about today, and how, again, the local people were told that they were suffering from brucellosis as opposed to being told the truth. Couple of things. What I've since learned is the Americans have did the same thing with our native people. They were not told about what was happening and suffered, again, the same atrocities that you folks suffered in Kazakhstan. What I wonder, though, is, and when I was there, I met the honorary ambassador Karapek Kayuko from the Atom Project, which is the abolish testing our mission is what it stands for. And again, he's an artist who's been disfigured from the radiation. He has no arms or but is a great artist, and I've seen his work, his artwork there. But what amazes me, though, is Kazakhstan has great supplies of uranium and is now supplying the world with uranium. And like Canada, I think was number one or in the world. Now Kazakhstan is number one. Canada is number two in the world. Kazakhstan, on the one sense, should be applauded for selling selling low enriched uranium for nuclear power, which means that countries like Iran doesn't need to have its own centrifuges that to make enriched uranium, low enriched uranium for nuclear power. And of course, if you have the centrifuges, then you can go to highly enriched uranium, which is then can be produced into atomic weapons. So on the one hand, I applaud Kazakhstan for that. Canada, by comparison, just sells uranium and then allows countries like India to do their own enrichment, which means that they can enrich all the way up to highly enriched uranium for nuclear weapons. But having seen all these problems, why is Kazakhstan even exporting uranium in the first place? And I think this is a disconnect that I've seen not only in Kazakhstan, but when I visited Japan. Japan has experienced the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and yet is got nuclear power all over the place. Here in Ontario, we get 60% of our power from nuclear power plants. We have the largest nuclear power plant in the world at the Bruce with 8 reactors all lined up, as well as Darlington and as well as Pickering here in Ontario. So I have trouble with citizens not equating or seeing the problems that uranium has caused with nuclear weapons, and yet don't make the connection that nuclear power produces the components, heavy water and plutonium, for nuclear weapons. Could you comment on that?
Thank you so much, Richard, and it's so nice to hear about your trip to Astana 6 years ago. I think I was at the same event. On this tension between Kazakhstan's past and the suffering and the current ambitious peaceful nuclear program. So I should mention from the outset that I'm personally not for, not against nuclear power. I do think that countries who decide to introduce nuclear power have to be so responsible and to weigh all the risks, and to really introduce it only if they're completely desperate for additional electricity, which I think in Kazakhstan's case is not the case, because we first need to sort out energy efficiency. We lose a lot of energy due to inefficiencies. So that's one thing. I think symbolically, there is something about Kazakhstan turning its, what it suffered from the Soviet nuclear infrastructure, and now trying to develop the scientific, technical infrastructure that they've inherited, and the technology and the science behind it for peaceful purposes. So there is something about the turnaround, but at the same time, I will be the first to say that I don't think the government is treating the environmental issues that are connected with the program seriously enough. We have pretty serious issues connected with uranium mining. And I think what happens, as probably universal for many countries, is that, when it comes to commercial or business profits, then sometimes for these companies, it's easier just to pay the fines rather than being, properly environmentally responsible. So yeah, I would say I'm not against the fact that Kazakhstan is trying to be a leader on the peaceful nuclear energy market, but I'm very concerned about my country doing it properly and doing it with respect and care for its own people. In terms of society and public perception, the past definitely had scarred the people, and people in Kazakhstan are very against nuclear in general. So that's why the government tried on a few occasions to build a nuclear power plant, and they couldn't, just because of the societal and opposition.
You're also an expert on financial crime. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on the connection or nuclear weapons are a very profitable area. And we in the anti-nuclear issue have a program by ICANN and PAX right now about don't bank on the bomb, to
Yes.
divest of nuclear weapons. Could you just comment what you have seen in terms of corruption, in terms of the manufacturing of nuclear weapons?
So my specific area of expertise at the moment, I'm looking at, it's more about illicit weapons programs, such as, for example, North Korea, and how they're under sanctions and are not supposed to use the global financial system. So that's, in technical terms, what I'm looking at. But your question is very important, and something that I bring up also quite often. So, for example, in discussions with my students, when we talk about, will there be that security discourse that the world cannot get rid of the weapons because of these arguments about security and all of that. And when the students are asking me, will there ever be political will to give up on nuclear weapons, or will there ever be security context in which they would be ready to give up nuclear weapons? And I always tell them that sometimes I think it's the money that's the most important obstacle. It's about this enormous money flows of the military industrial complex and all these companies that that they're making money off the weapons program. So while I just in general think that's where our biggest problem lies, that if there wouldn't be such strong motivations from the financial side, they would be able to find political will, but we have this huge obstacle in the shape and form of money, and that's why I'm extremely supportive of the initiatives that push the companies and the universities and institutions to divest, and that's how you kind of start squeezing the space in which weapons programs operate.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jonathan for a question, and then after Jonathan, we have Dorothy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for getting up so early in the morning to be with us. It's great. Mary Wynn and I teach in high schools and about nuclear weapons. And I was just wondering, what has been your experience meeting young people? Do they have the level of understanding about the significance of nuclear weapons in their particular in their context? Because one of the things that we found is that the issue has fallen off the radar completely. It's been taken over by other important issues like climate change, for example, and more recently pandemic. So I was just wondering, in traveling around and speaking with friends and neighbors and so on, well, what's been your sense about how concerned young people are about nuclear weapons?
Unfortunately, there is such a serious lack of awareness. And I think for a country like Kazakhstan that has nuclear as an important part of its past. So among the adults, you have nuclear phobia, radiophobia, and this negative attitude to anything that is nuclear. But the new generation, some of them don't even know about the nuclear test, and they don't know about nuclear weapons. And I think that's a real weakness in Kazakhstan's educational system, that that's not part of our discourse, not enough. You know, we have kind of more for political narratives. Of course, you know, we have this strong story that the first president closed the nuclear testing site, but in terms of true nuanced education of nuclear dangers, nuclear risks, we lack that, both at the high school level, but also at the university level. If, you know, for a country that is, has this background, but also that is, you know, pretty active currently in the peaceful nuclear sphere, I'm taken aback that we don't pay enough attention in the education.
Yeah, thank you.
Then I believe, Dorothy, you can go ahead.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you're good now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very moving, but also very familiar, because I'm very familiar with the whole nuclear fuel process, the uranium mining, the weapons connections, etc. And Richard, I just wanted to say that we have been very involved in about the relationship with spent fuel from the nuclear reactors to the nuclear weapons. And I've been working with Gordon Edwards from the Canadian Coalition of Nuclear Responsibility, I would say, for the last 45 years. Well, we actually founded it in Montreal many, many years ago. And he has been a source of incredible information. I would urge people to look at the CCNR website, Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility.ca. The website is full of all kinds of amazing information. Most people are not aware of the connection with reactors and weapons, but those of us who know this issue know that India and Pakistan, both countries, made their nuclear weapons from CANDU technology, and that spent fuel and plutonium connection that we learned about a long time ago. People don't talk enough about that, because this is a technology that we know is leading to bad things. In terms of nuclear reactors, we should not be encouraging them at all. Nobody knows what to do with the spent fuel. I personally teach about environmental and ecosystem health to graduate students at the University of Toronto. I've been doing that for 20 years, last 20. I'm very old, so I've been doing that for the last 20 years. And we have known so much all these years about the whole nuclear fuel chain. And when students learn about this, and by the way, there's a film called Uranium. It's a National Film Board film, and it's all about the history of uranium mining in Canada. And most uranium is found on Indigenous lands. There's a whole question of the racial profiling that goes with people who did not have the ability to resist and stop it. So there's a lot about the whole nuclear fuel chain that we need to educate people about. Canada's very involved, as we know, with the uranium mining. We have been involved for all the years, and we were involved actually in the manufacture of the weapons for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Canadian technology and technicians and so on. And there's a long history of that kind of collaboration on nuclear weapons. We don't make them ourselves, and we're not involved in using them ourselves, but we have had a whole history of that together. But when it comes back to nuclear power, we should never encourage it. They don't know what to do about the waste. What I teach about is the environmental health impacts of ionizing radiation. And the ionizing radiation tritium, which is a known carcinogen, a mutagen, and a teratogen, is going into the drinking water wherever nuclear reactors are. And we have cancer, high cancer rate. It's not only that. I mean, I'm involved in a lot of environmental health work on cancer prevention. So this is what we need to help people to understand. We have safe alternatives to nuclear power for energy. the first thing has to be, and as you said, the energy efficiency and conservation, stop the waste. There is so much waste, and we're building for when they want to build more reactors and they want to refurbish reactors here. And now they're talking about small modular nuclear reactors. It's all about money and pouring money into their friends from the nuclear industry.
Thanks very much, Dorothy. We have to start wrapping up because it's 5:50.
I just want to say that there are no solutions to the problems of the radiation escaping from the nuclear plants and the whole process. So I just wanted to give you that information because I think it's really important to make these connections internationally. So look up the website of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. There's tons of really good stuff on it. Thank you so much for your work and good luck with it all. And I'm really glad that you've come. Oh, you're not here, of course. You've come via technology.
Thanks, Dorothy. I'm going to ask Toxana if she has any final comments that she would like to say now in wrap up.
There was something that kind of came through in comments of several people, and I just want to echo that the racial and the injustice component of the nuclear programs. And I'm just glad that because of the whole, resurgence of racial discourse in the United States, that now people in our own field started paying more attention to that. And I think it's a very important conversation that we have to have. It's about how nuclear powers chose where to conduct nuclear tests, and there is a clear trend, the types of land that they chose, and the fact that people whose land it was, they were in a more vulnerable position, a position of less power, and there was a lot of abuse there. And similarly with uranium mining, that it's also true that very often you have more vulnerable communities that suffer. I just wanted to thank all of you for your interest, for joining today, and for giving me a chance to speak about my country, and for all the work that you are doing. It's been a real pleasure to be here today.
It's been a real honor for us to have you. And if you could hear the roaring applause, you would know how much we've appreciated this. And I hope that we can maintain a contact with you, Toxan. This has been just wonderful. And to the group, I'd like to say welcome to those people who have not come to our active member meetings as an observer before. You're most welcome. And if you want to be invited, we do this the second Wednesday of each month at this same time. And you can send an email to admin@ippnwcanada.ca, and then we'll put you on the regular mailing list so you know when there's another speaker coming up. So thank you, and say hello to the people in Kazakhstan on our behalf. Thank you.
I will. Thank you so much.
A pleasure.